Okay, it is 6:30, so we are going to get started. Thank you for coming tonight to the Find Your Fit webinar. Tonight we're talking about college money matters. This is designed for parents. Um, Peg and I were laughing earlier. I think anybody who shows up tonight is probably not a sports fan because the who would have thought when we scheduled this that the Mariners would be fighting for a spot in the World Series, and this is Game 7, and the Seahawks are playing. But anyways, this is being recorded, so I'm joined tonight by Peg Keogh, who's a financial planning expert. She's with College Aid Pro. I am Mary Pat O'Neill. I am an independent college counselor here in the Redmond area. And I volunteer my services and created the Find Your Fit program through the Lake Washington Schools Foundation. And um, I always want to stress the fact that these programs that I do, they are not, we are not trying to hook anybody in and try to sell something or anything like that. We are sharing the knowledge that we have as a way of leveling the playing field in education and giving back to the community. So thank you for joining us tonight. So this is being recorded, and the recording will be sent to everybody who registered. There will be a resource sheet that is sent out with the recording, and Peg and I will take questions at the end. So when it comes to applying to college, creating a college list, there's so many different factors that come into play. Every parent wants their child to attend a good college. And there's different factors that come into play as to how to determine what is a good college. There's the academic fit, there's a personal fit. And the piece that I often find that families don't want to pay the attention to is the financial fit, because if you're not aware of it, college in the United States is very expensive. And Peg, I would love to hear any comments that you have to say here, but I am always amazed at, I don't know if it's, parents don't want to squash dreams or they don't want to limit their children, but a college budget is a really important piece in this. And when I meet with clients, like at the first meeting, and we talk about the cost of college, and I say you should make sure to talk about this as a family. Earlier is better. When I create a college list, I always ask the teens, have your parents talk to you about college budget? And pretty much, I'd say 99% of the time, the kids go, no, we've never talked about it. Anyways, it seems like it's spring of senior year that families talk about it, which, in my
Mhm.
opinion, is way too late. But what do you see in your expertise of working with families and budgeting and all that?
Yeah, I'd say my background is in financial planning and financial advising. And even when I was playing that role before I focused exclusively on this, like, well over a decade ago, the word budget makes people cringe. A lot of people, and even people that make a lot of money. It's just not in their wheelhouse. It's not something they're comfortable with. But I can't stress enough in this space. I mean, to your point, Mary Pat, some of the most expensive schools this year for kids that just started are over 100,000 full price. We're going to talk about how that price really is irrelevant tonight, but that's a big price tag. I don't care how much money you make. That's going to put a dent if you have one child or if you have two or three. So thinking about the budget, if you're married, the first step is that you got to sit down with your spouse or your partner and have this discussion about where each person is coming from as far as a budget and break it down into, do you have savings, cash flow? Grandma and grandpa mentioned helping. Do you want your kid to have skin in the game? These are all the different pieces. And then once you have a feel as a couple or as a parent or a guardian, then you can sit down and discuss it with your child. And it's huge. It cuts down on the stress when you address this honestly before you even go looking at colleges. You have a clue about what you can afford and how the different colleges are going to look at your family. So you don't have what you said, Mary Pat, these squashed dreams. I had a mom several years ago in tears saying my child called me a dream crusher, and I was just sitting there thinking, This is so sad because it's avoidable, and talking about the budget and thinking about that is just super important. It's fundamental in the process.
Absolutely. And the other thing, you brought up a very good point, is that it's not black and white. It's not one size fits all. Every family is different and has its own approaches. Um, I'm a first generation. My parents, I don't even know how I got to college sometimes. How that was even, I'm one of five. And I had to take out student loans. And you know, I'll tell you, talk about a dream crusher. It was was paying back those student loans, but it was tough on me, and but as you said, everybody does it differently, and generally speaking, teens don't have a great grasp on money. I have talked to families where the parents are saying, but we can only afford, whatever dollar amount, and what the child wants is twice as much. And the you know, well, what's the big deal? It's just, it's just money. The other thing I want to point out is that in the United States, the system is designed that parents are expected to pay for college. And that, if there are any teens listening to this, that doesn't mean you can say to your parents, hey, those ladies said you got to pay for my college. What I mean by that is it's not subsidized by the government. And other, like if you're Canadian, man, check out those Canadian schools because they subsidize the cost of college. It is pretty much the same as going to community college here. So just it is important to talk about. So,
Yep.
all right. So I'm going to spend just a couple minutes here explaining the three types of colleges that we have here in the United States, because the type of college does impact the cost of college. It also impacts admissibility, but I'm not really going to get into that too much right here. Okay, so we are located here in Washington State, and Washington State has six in-state four-year public universities. They are the University of Washington, Washington State, Western Washington, Eastern Washington, Central Washington, and Evergreen State College. Because you live in Washington State, your children get priority admission to our state colleges. So last year at UW Seattle, I think it was something like 72% of admitted students were Washington State residents. But in what we're talking about tonight, the other thing is the important piece is because we live in Washington State, we pay property tax in Washington State. Property taxes fund education. So they deeply discount the tuition at our six schools. UW and Washington State are the most expensive. They're roughly about $13,000 a year for tuition, not room and board, which isn't a number to scoff at. But when I talk about the other numbers, it is quite dramatically lower. And that is why so many families want their students to stay in state attending a public university. Now, the second category is tricky because I have to talk about 49 different states, but it's the out-of-state public university. So, first of all, you're not a resident, so you've lost the priority admission. But again, more importantly for tonight's conversation, you haven't paid the property taxes, and property taxes, as I said, fund education. So because of that, generally speaking, out-of-state non-resident tuition is usually around three times in-state tuition. And again, it depends on the state. California is a great example. The California State University system, which would include San Diego State, Cal Poly, schools like that, versus the University of California system, very different in price. San Diego State, out-of-state tuition, about 20,000-ish, whereas UC San Diego is probably about 48, 49,000. And if I'm wrong with those numbers, Peg, correct me.
No,
So
you're in the ballpark.
yeah,
And as you said, we're just talking tuition,
yeah.
not room and
Oh,
board
right.
and books. So
Yeah,
it's quite a bit more than that at the end of the
yeah,
day, but it's a big difference if you're just comparing tuition to
right.
tuition.
And there are some states where they're eager to have out-of-state students. And especially if your student is a strong student with GPA and test scores and things like that, they'll be like, love you, would love to have you. Here's some money to persuade you to come. And other states, I'll say California is one of them, Texas, Georgia. There are other states where they're like, you might get the privilege of attending our school, but we save all of our scholarship money for our residents. And then the third category is the private university, which oftentimes families will say, oh, those are too expensive. Generally speaking, I mean, they are more expensive, but I kind of put them in line a lot of times with out-of-state publics. But so they don't care necessarily where a student lives because they don't get funded through tax dollars. But there can be private universities that are very generous with scholarship money because they know they're competing against the in-state publics or out-of-state publics that are generous. So I always say keep an open mind. Anything that you would add to what I had to say there, Peg?
Yeah, I have a slide when we're presenting, and it actually shows UW and Gonzaga from
Mhm.
like 3, 4 years ago, an actual student of mine. And I show them like UW was 35 all in, 35,000, and Gonzaga is more than double, right? So it's easy to look and say, well, gosh, 35 is too much times
Mhm.
four. Forget about Gonzaga. And then I show the actual package that the student got, and at the end of the day, Gonzaga was 40 versus the 35,000. Completely different story. We even have examples of students like at UMass Amherst, that's like a
Mhm.
UW, right?
Mhm.
And a very expensive private school like a Northeastern or something could end up being almost the same
Mhm.
because of the just what you said. The private schools, they all have their quote unquote business plans, I like to call them,
Right.
of how they discount. And some,
Mhm.
like you said, they just really don't. If your child gets into Berkeley, they're gonna say you are lucky you got into
Yes.
Berkeley. Here's your bill. Like you're not gonna get any money from Berkeley. That's not a bad thing. It's not. We're not
No.
trashing Berkeley. It's just that's the kind of stuff you want to understand as you're building the
Right.
college list. So you're not second semester senior year, you know,
Yeah. And
getting a surprise.
uh, you know, as somebody who's in the midst of editing essays for students right right now, the seniors, and I know some of my students are applying to schools where they have told me, "Oh, my parents have already told me we can't afford to go there because, it's the Berkeleys of the world or the University of Michigan, whatever." And I just think, why are you going through all this work? But I guess that's
Yeah.
neither here nor there. Okay, so Peg and I have done this session before. I think it's been what 2 years, I think, since we
Yeah,
last
I
did
think
it.
2 years. Yeah.
And there's been a lot of changes. This is not a political conversation at all, but there are some changes in higher ed. There's been a lot of headlines. Anything like I can say from a college admissions standpoint, I hear students talk and sometimes the parents talk, thinking that, oh, it'll be easier to get into the Harvards and the Stanfords of the world because it appears that there will be less international students applying to U.S. schools. It's things like that. What are you hearing from in your work?
Yeah, so basically if you're paying attention at all and you're seeing your whatever news source that you use, there's a lot of strains on colleges and universities right now.
Mhm.
And that what you just touched on, Mary Pat, is a big one. They're not, my husband just talked to a person at ASU, Arizona State, and he said, yeah, we have a third less international students. This was at the graduate level. No, actually it wasn't. He was an undergrad guy. So that's part of this climate that's going on. And they make some nice money on international students. So that's a strain on cash flow. There's an endowment tax that was passed in the Big Beautiful Act, that's hitting way more colleges than used to. I don't see this for in the near future, meaning this year, next year, just swooping in and dramatically changing things. We're going to talk about how colleges discount. I don't see that changing, but you just have to be aware of this. So for example, I do see colleges making cuts in programs that they don't have many students in. For example, they're trying to cut corners, let faculty go different things. So for example, I don't know, anthropology. If your child has always wanted to study that, make sure you're looking at a school where they have a robust anthropology program, not one where there's just a few kids, because it could be something where your child goes, gets admitted, loves it, and then all of a sudden, through cutting measures, they decide to get rid of that major or close down a department. And then your child, has to switch majors, transfer to another college or university. So that's something to keep in mind. It's an uncertain, stressful time for the universities and colleges. And so that's as a person, with a child, and you're literally shopping for college. You guys are the buyers, right? You're the consumers. You want to really look at these schools and do some analysis. I don't think it's going to be any easier to get into the selective colleges than it's been in the past. But I call them selective colleges, not elite, not the best colleges, because the best college for your child is where your child's going to thrive, not a school that everybody and their brothers heard of. And that's another conversation, and we'll touch on that later. But that's as far as the higher ed climate and all the changes that are coming down. Those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point, and that's the fact that just everyone needs to remember and be aware of the fact that colleges are businesses.
They are big, they are nonprofits, but
And-
almost all of them, but they are big businesses and they function like
Yep,
businesses.
and they have boards of directors and all that type of stuff that they have
And
to have.
huge marketing
Yep,
budgets.
yep, they absolutely do. All right, so this slide here, this is just, I guess it's kind of the depressing slide. It's the annual cost of attendance for 25, 26. And all I counted was tuition and room and board. There obviously can be other expenses and costs and things like that. But I, so what I did was the name of the college, tuition, room and board, the total, and then I just multiplied it by four. These no the 4 year numbers I don't think are accurate because the cost of college keeps going up every year, but this is just based on today's information. So you can see, UW, an in-state public, you're looking at $127,000 for 4 years. Western Washington, as I said, UW and Washington State are the most expensive. You can see that Western's a little bit more, a little bit less at just under 100,000. UCLA and out-of-state public, you're looking at almost 290. And again, the UCs as a general rule, especially the ones that everybody's heard of, there's no scholarship money available. We didn't talk yet about WUI, but Colorado State is, which is an out-of-state public. These are the WUI prices for it. Gonzaga, which is private, it shows 291,000 for the 4 years. I can tell you if you have a strong student, good grades and things like that, they are very generous with scholarship money, which again, I don't have an exact number, but Peg, would you say for a strong student for 4 years, you could probably take off 100,000 roughly?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yep, for strong. And what's really nice about that is, and you see how Mary Pat just said it for 4 years because it's awarded annually,
Mhm.
but it's almost always guaranteed each year, which
Yeah.
is great. It's great for planning because
Yeah.
it's coming in as a parent.
Yep. And then Stanford, which is private, almost 360,000. And then I showed Bellevue College, uh, which is, well, Bellevue College is a college. They do have 4 year programs, but I'm showing this more as a 2 year associates type program. And you can see the cost is $4,400 a year. And then if you were to transfer to a 4 year college, it'd be a huge cost savings, which we'll talk more about that later. But I want the reality of these numbers because these are huge numbers. Uh, I recently made the mistake of mentioning to my husband how much we've paid between two undergrads, a master's, a doctorate, all this stuff, and it was a very big number. So it is a lot of money. So I mentioned WUI. WUI stands for the Western Undergraduate Exchange. I said earlier that out-of-state non-resident students typically pay 3 times in-state tuition. WUI schools, there's 14 states and Washington participates, where instead of the 3 times, it's a 1.5 times savings. So it's a huge cost savings. Unfortunately, it is not every public university in the 14 states. If you just type in WUI, WUE in your search engine, you'll see a list. the requirements for qualifying for WUI depends on the school. There are some schools that you can qualify for WUI with a 3.0. Some of them you need almost a 4.0. Um, some schools, every major is included, others it's two majors. It depends, but it can be a great way for families where students want to go out of state can get a huge cost savings. Anything you want to say about WUI, Peg?
Yeah, Wooey's it's great, but just what you said, the devil's in the details because they're and like for example, Oregon State used to
Mhm.
give nice merit to Washington kids, and then they switched to Wooey, and all they would tell me was, well, it's competitive. So I've seen it through the years, Montana
Mhm.
State get harder and harder for good
Yes.
students to
Yeah.
get it. So it's
Yeah.
not an ace in the hole, but other schools, everybody with a 3.1 gets
Yeah.
WUI, and
Right.
then others you don't really know until you see the pool that you're competing against. And as you said, it can be very specific to major at a given college or university.
The one thing I will say, especially if there's any parents of seniors who's if your kids are applying to some WUI schools, apply sooner than later because WUI funds are limited, and the sooner you get the application in, uh, the better the results might be. So, but most of the school websites, if you type in WUI on a school website, they usually will say what the GPA requirements are. So.
Yeah, and last nice thing about Wooey is it doesn't I mean, you could be making Bill Gates money. It's
Mhm.
not based on, so it's a form of merit, if you will,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it doesn't
absolutely.
doesn't require them to look at your FAFSA and, exclude you potentially. So
Yeah, and I would say most schools, I can't think of anybody who where standardized test scores are part of the process. They used to be, but I don't think they are anymore. So, but again, the school's website will tell you more. Okay, Peg, I'm going to let you do some talking here. There's two types of aid when we talk about money for college, need-based and merit-based. I'll let you just take it from there.
yeah, yeah. So as the names kind of hint to, they're very different, right? And so every year you're going to be assessed as a family, your student, for need-based aid. And that's why you're submitting financial aid forms for that assessment to happen. So, and I think in a slide or two, we have a nice equation. It's a very simple equation, but it's cost of attendance, and that's the total piece. The slide that Mary Pat showed before, she made it clear that's room and board and tuition and fees. It's the whole enchilada when they're doing it. So there's books, there's personal expenses. So for most schools, it would add another 5 to 7 thousand potentially on what Mary Pat showed on that slide. That's the full cost of attendance. Then they calculate something called a student aid index, or used to be called an expected family contribution, and some schools are still using that terminology. But they take their full costs, they subtract this number. So say it comes out to $40,000. That means that doesn't mean that's what you're expected to pay for college, but that's what the colleges think you can afford for a year of school. Most parents look at the number and say, that's for 4 years, right, Peg? And I have to unfortunately tell them, no, you have to multiply it by four. So they take that number. So say the school costs 80, you have a student aid index, SAI, of 40,000. That means you have 40,000 of need. And then the school goes to bat once your child's admitted and decides how they're going to meet that need. And some schools, like the Stanfords of the world, they meet 100% of need. The key thing is what they think your need is. But once that's figured out, 100%, and some of like the Ivies and stuff, they don't even put loans in there, which is they can afford it, right? They can put more of their institutional grant money to meet your need. So that's need-based aid. Some colleges, they'll self-report what they do in need-based aid. They'll say we meet 80% on average, and 90% of that 80% is grants and not subsidized loans and work study. That gets released, they self-report these numbers. So that's need-based aid. So it's critical for you to understand what your student aid index is, and there's actually two. So it depends on the college and that business plan that Mary Pat and I are talking about, how they assess need. That's really important for you to understand. That's a big part of why I exist and what I do and my expertise. So that's need-based aid. Merit-based aid is the flip side. It doesn't matter if you make Bill Gates money, if you have no income, the Office of Admissions wants your child and starts discounting the cost of attendance right off the bat. They don't care. Honestly, they will know a lot of families on paper could probably pay full price and they don't care. They're going to give that family a $25,000 discount every year because they want that student. And for the colleges, it's all about net revenue. It's not about getting the maximum number of full price families. They love full price families, but they're going to have families where they're subsidizing most of it and everything in between all the way to full pay. And so 55,000 in net revenue is a lot better than a student that just doesn't come. And so that's a big part of the merit base. And it's usually based on grades and test scores, but it can be sports, talents, music. And just like the schools all do their need-based aid differently, it's the same thing with merit. Some schools offer zero merit, like the Ivies. It's just the way they do business. There's no child walking around those campuses that has a merit scholarship, even though they could have had a perfect SAT and a 5.0 weighted GPA. It doesn't matter. They just don't do that, but they're wonderful with need-based aid. So understanding the colleges that you're looking for, first of all, understanding your family and where you fit and where, what your strategies are, and then looking at how that plays out in different colleges because they're all discounting. And as I said earlier, we were talking about what's going on and the uncertainty and the strains on colleges and universities. That discounting is not going to stop. In fact, it's been going up percentage wise for years, and it can be a strain on certain colleges that just don't have the funding to sustain giving massive scholarships every year to students.
And to clarify, and if I have this wrong, let me know. So in order to get need-based, there are forms that need to be filled out, which we'll talk about in a minute. But merit-based aid, students don't apply for it. It is given to students. Typically, the students are made aware of what the merit-based award would be when they get their acceptance letter. Some schools wait a little bit, but I would say generally speaking, they get the information with admission, correct, Peg?
Yeah, usually I'd say, but I don't know if it's 50-50, maybe a little bit more to your point that it comes with admission and they'll say, congratulations, you got the $100,000 Provost scholarship,
Mhm.
which means 25,000 a year. Some schools, like my son went to Indiana University years ago and his came like 3 weeks later. Back then it was in a letter saying, oh,
Yeah,
you got this scholarship. So all the schools are a little bit different.
yeah,
And there, most schools will, they have a deadline where you have to apply for admission. And as long as you've got your admission package fully in, a lot of times it's December 1, but not every school, then you're automatically considered for merit. There are some schools that have really, really nice merit, like full tuition and room and board. Those quite often will require other essays, an
right, yeah,
interview, but here's 10,000 a year or 20,000 a year. Typically, you do not have a separate application, but that's another thing to have a pulse on. That's why, we'll talk about deadlines and everything, but that's why I typically recommend you get your forms in the month of October, even if the deadline for regular admission is until January 1, because these merit-based scholarships, the automatic and ones that they send out, a lot of times they want your app in
yeah,
earlier than the
yeah,
deadline for the app if
yeah,
it's regular decision.
yeah. You're correct on that. There's typically December 1st is very common, even for students who are applying regular and not early. Um, the other thing is, again, obviously it depends on the scholarship. The best place to find information about how, if there are any additional applications or essays and things like letters of rec needed, is just to go to a college's website and type in merit scholarships and see what comes up. So
or Google it. Sometimes if you Google it, it gets you to the place. Sometimes searching on the websites is
Yeah.
harder, but I like to Google because then it'll say University of Miami, and
Yeah.
usually one of the first two links will get you on their website
Yep.
where you want to be. And I would always, for deadlines, I always say go to the college's
Yeah,
website, because even if
absolutely.
there's websites that have them, colleges can change their
Yep.
deadlines. And then if you miss a deadline, you're toast. It's
Yep.
really punitive.
Yep. Absolutely. Uh-oh. What happened here? All right, everybody. Go back. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about, and you've mentioned this a bit, the whole idea of discounting. Um, Define it, explain to families what it is, and how is it done?
Yeah, yeah. So these high sticker prices, I always say if you know what you're doing, you will realize they're irrelevant. And it's counterintuitive to look at $100,000, $85,000 price tag, and then all of a sudden it's 60 for your family. I mean, it's kind of like Kohl's. Almost everything's on sale at Kohl's, right?
Right.
But everything, unlike Kohl's, if I go to Kohl's or Mary Pat goes to Kohl's, we're going to get that same sale price on a given item. That's not the way colleges are. They're going to look at your family, your child. I have twins. So my kids applied to a bunch of the same schools and they got different packages because they're different kids. So it's not even the same in your from college to college it differs, and from child to child it differs. That's why it's super important to get dialed in and understand it. And as we were saying before, those are the two main places you want to look for. You need to figure out if you're eligible for need-based aid, and you may be at some schools and not at other schools because of the price tags, because of the way that they decide that the factors that they look at to calculate that student aid index are going to be different from school to school. And so you might have one where you do have need and others you don't. So this is where it gets kind of opaque and difficult. And so, I'll talk about at the end. We have free software that you can go in and put in three schools and see your SAIs and play around and change the numbers. And it's totally free for three schools. So, you want to go to kind of a source of truth and understand that. The discounting on the merit side, like I said earlier, it's just another way that the colleges discount. So it's important to understand for your child, is your child going to get those discounts at Gonzaga? Because there could be two kids with different grades, test scores, and one maybe gets no merit and the other one gets huge merit. It just, you gotta do your homework and understand that ahead of time so that you have a good feel. There's no exact science. If anybody tells you that, a professional says, I'm going to guarantee you're going to get this, that, or the other thing, I would run, because it can be very subjective. The admissions process is subjective, and the colleges have some wiggle room when they're creating packages. They're strategically creating financial aid packages through this discounting. The other thing I'll mention, because years ago when I was doing this, I never thought to mention it. And then I had a mom who was just horrified to find out that the merit money and the need-based aid, they all come from the college, unless you're getting it from the federal government or the state of Washington. So that's all part of that bucket. So if your child is fortunate enough and gets a $25,000 merit scholarship and you have $20,000 of need, well, that merit has more, you're getting a great deal, because on paper, you should only be getting 20,000 of help, but your child actually got 25,000. They don't typically, there's a few instances, but typically they don't what we call stack. So don't think of merit and need-based aid separately. Think about the merit usually comes first, like we're talking about. And then if that eats up all your need, then so be it. The financial aid office isn't going to roll in and give you a lot of institutional grants if the merit's already fulfilling that need. So just keep that in mind.
So Peg, you mentioned families doing their homework, and I realize you'll be providing the link, if people want to use the free software for the software for the three colleges, whatever. What other type of homework can a family do? Like, is it looking at the net price calculator or? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you can go to net price calculators. I would caution you not to only use net price
Can you
calculators.
define for people what that is?
Yeah. So I think in 2010, the government came out and said, okay, all colleges and universities have to have this thing called a net price calculator. The colleges, I mean, I talked to them. I was just at a conference and talked to them. They're not super excited about having to do this, but they were told they had to do it, so they do it. And so what it is it's a place where you can plug in numbers and they're supposed to tell you, hey, this is about what your cost is going to be. Some of the net price calculators are amazing. A big thing, if you go to one and it takes you a solid 15 minutes to fill it in, that's an indicator that that's probably a better net price calculator, because the more data you put in, and as long as it's good data and you understand what they're asking, you put it in correctly, that's probably going to give you a better output. There are some of them that actually will project merit aid. Sometimes it's a range, so it's 10 to 25,000. That's nice, but it's not that helpful because that's such a wide range. But then there are calculators that are, ironically, the federal government put out a template when they passed this ruling, and their template is terrible. It just barely asks any questions.
Yeah.
So the output of that is meaningless because you're not putting in, if when you get in and look at some of them, it'll make sense to you. Because if you're not putting in the information that you're going to do on financial aid forms, there's no way that they can project. And you also have to understand they're not binding. I always tell my families print it out. And I've had a few instances where I tell them to use it on appeal, and it can be successful, not all the time. But it is a good thing to complement other sources if it's a decent calculator. And I mean, that's a big F. I wouldn't make decisions about like early decision or something just by going to the calculator. If you're really going to do something like that and you want to understand the discounting and sign a contract, that's where you want to go to good software or get a pre-read from the college if they'll do it. Not all colleges, I've seen colleges nowadays that just push the parents to the net price calculator, and sometimes their calculators are not accurate and it's to the detriment of the university. Like they're saying that the family's going to get less money than they actually end up getting, and it makes people say, well, this isn't affordable. So sometimes it's not even to their benefit when they don't have good calculators. So you got to play that one by ear.
And just so everybody knows, to find the net price calculator, if you go to a college's website, in the search box, just put in net price calculator and it'll lead you to that school's net price calculator. Thanks for all that, Peg. Okay, now let's talk about the required forms in order, for sure, for need-based, which is the FAFSA and the CSS profile. So FAFSA, everybody's probably heard that term. It stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. CSS Profile is the College Scholarship Service. But Peg, I'll let you talk more about them.
Yeah, so almost every school in the country requires the FAFSA, and most schools in the country only require the FAFSA. That's how they're going to give your child the financial aid package we're talking about. That's how the federal government will give money or subsidize loans or work study. That's how the state of Washington assesses if you're eligible for state aid. And then the colleges that don't require the CSS in addition to the FAFSA, that's how they give out what we call institutional aid. And that by far is the best source of the need-based discounts. The Pell Grant is a little shy of 7,400. You have to have relatively low income to be eligible. Same thing in the state of Washington. There's some nice money, but it's for people that are lower economic level, right? So it's great if that's who you are. Um, Now, the second form, the CSS profile, that's administered by College Board, which your kids will most likely have College Board logins. They do APs, PSAT, SAT. They also administer the CSS profile. So there's about 250, mostly private, but there's a few publics like Michigan, UNC Chapel Hill, William and Mary, UVA. A couple other schools have started using the CSS profile when the FAFSA had so many hiccups. in the first 2 years because honestly, they just wanted to get the data. They weren't necessarily using everything on the CSS profile, all the information they had. But those are the main ones that actually we call it the institutional methodology. So there's some key differences. So you submit that form along with the FAFSA, not in lieu of it. And then the college uses what they calculate the second SAI, the second student aid index or family contribution, like a lot of these schools like to call it. There's a second one, and that's what they use in that equation where they say cost of attendance minus that family contribution is your need. So if you don't submit both forms, then they will not give you their institutional money if you're eligible for it. So it's really important to know if the college requires both and get both in by the deadlines, so that you put your best foot forward. I'll just real quick, a couple key differences between the two forms. The FAFSA does not require you to share information about the home you live in. So your primary home, if you own it and you're not renting, you might not own it free and clear. Bank might own some of it, but your equity, your market value minus your loans, HELOCs, anything like that, that's your equity. That is off the table on the FAFSA. So in the Seattle area, I just sold a home in Seattle in May. The housing prices are quite high, right? And some of you might be sitting on a lot of equity. That's wonderful. And it's great at a FAFSA only school. They're not going to ask about your house. Other real estate they will, but not the home you live in. The CSS profile, on the other hand, wants to know about all your real estate, including the home you live in. And a lot of those schools will look at your equity literally as like a checking account, savings account that you can pay for college. The other key difference between these two is that if you are a divorced or separated family, the FAFSA only requires one biological parent that they call the custodial parent to submit the FAFSA with the student. So that other biological parent is their finances are not included at all. And the custodial parent is defined as the parent who provides the most financial support for that child on a year look back from when you're literally hitting submit on these financial aid forms. So I'm a financial planner by background. Like I said, that's a planning opportunity. I've helped a lot of families. Our team at College Aid Pros helped a lot of families honestly figure out who is the custodial parent, because some people are 50-50. Don't be 50-50. Figure it out. Spend literally $1 more for the parent that makes the most sense. So that's a big planning opportunity. The CSS profile, both parents, both biological parents are going to submit the custodial parent that matches the FAFSA will submit the CSS profile. The non-custodial parent will submit the non-custodial profile. So you don't have that opportunity to have one biological parent not included. The last thing that's different that can be better for a CSS profile school, for example, like me, I had twins, so I always had two kids in college at the same time. The CSS profile schools will take that into account and reduce what they think you can pay by 30 to 40%. The FAFSA schools used to reduce it by almost 50%, but the FAFSA Simplification Act that was passed a couple years ago got rid of that. So now they ask how many you have in college, but it's not embedded in the formula to calculate the student aid index. You can always talk to the school about it, but it's not part of the formula. So that's another planning opportunity where a CSS profile school with a higher sticker price could end up being cheaper in crossover years if you have a junior and a senior, for example, in high school, just because they're going to lower the SAI/family contribution because they realize you have two in school and you have the same income and the same assets. We all kind of scratched our head, Mary Pat, when the government decided
Yeah,
that. We're like, that doesn't make any sense, but
I,
it is what it is.
it
So
is. I can't remember the politician who said it, but I read somebody said, well, it's not my fault if people don't plan their families properly.
yeah, I know. Like that's the last thing people are
Right.
thinking about when they're
Yes,
newly
yes,
married or
exactly.
whatever in their 20s or 30s. So
So, and feel free to say anything to what I'm about to say. So the FAFSA is fairly straightforward, and in the resources that I send out, I will have there'll be a link on how to complete the FAFSA. Same with the CSS profile. The CSS profile is a lot more in depth with the information that it asks. And Peg, I thought you had a really good point about getting it done in October. That if you want to repeat that.
Yeah, there's all different deadlines at the schools, but we at CAP, we always try and say, hey, just get it done in October. I think there's a few that are October 15th, but maybe two or three tops. So if you get it done in the month of October, then you've probably met the deadline. Otherwise, you got to go look at all the schools and find out what the priority financial aid deadline is. And it's going to be dependent on how your child applies for admission. So if it's regular decision, that's going to be the latest FAFSA CSS profile deadline. Early decision is the earliest, and those are usually November 1. So we're knocking on the door a couple weeks. That's why we just tell people, just get it in. If you're eligible for Washington state aid, you want to have it in now, because I always tell people you don't have to do it the first day, but you want to do it within the first week. So if you haven't done that and you're eligible, get it in, because there is a queue and there aren't unlimited funds. So you want to get in that queue so you get the most money that you can, that you're eligible for.
Another point I wanted to bring up was this is based on, is it, so for, is this on 20, tax year 2023 when people are filling this out or?
No, it's going to be, yeah, if you have a senior, it's all about 2024.
Okay.
That's going to be what we call your base year. So that's the other thing. When you have kids in college, if you've been, taxpayers that your CPA loves to just extend you and you get it done October 15th, which is past, obviously, you want to get your taxes done quicker when you have kids in college. You might be appealing, which we're going to talk about a little bit tonight. That's like a whole webinar in and of itself. But, if you are going to appeal because your circumstances are different, you're going to want to have the 25 tax return. If you're appealing, if you have a senior and you're appealing this winter spring to a college in a certain circumstance, so you want to get your taxes done quickly when your kids are in school. Just tell your CPA, I will get you all my information. I don't want to be extended. So
Yeah. And the other thing, sometimes families will ask me about the WAVSFA, which is the Washington Application for Free Student Aid. Um, and if I'm incorrect here, but the only families who would complete the WAVSA instead of the FAFSA would be families who are not eligible to apply for federal student aid, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're a US citizen, the student, you can do the FAFSA. There's also this industry term, eligible non-citizen. And if you Google that, it'll give you the definition of an eligible non-citizen. An eligible non-citizen can also submit the FAFSA. So you want to, at least at this point in time, things are changing a lot and quickly, but those are the two entities or groups, if you will. But yeah, if you're not eligible to submit the FAFSA, then you could submit the WAFSA. In the state of Washington, for state of Washington schools, and then if you're an international student, you're not eligible to submit the FAFSA. But a lot of schools will ask you to do the CSS profile because they have even more information about you to be able to assess if they're going to do need-based aid, which a lot of them don't, but some do merit. It's just, that's a college by college thing.
Okay. All right. So I know I hear all the time, oh, I'm not going to fill out the FAFSA. We're not going to qualify. So Peg, who should submit the FAFSA?
Okay, I would tell you, everybody listening, if you're eligible, you should submit the FAFSA and most likely the CSS profile. And I'll tell you the few of the main reasons. So just what Mary Pat said, and I've heard this every year since I started my own business, joined CAP forever. And parents like, I'm not doing it. My neighbor didn't. My sister didn't. I'm not going to get anything. The first thing is, people, they think they're not eligible because somebody told them. It's rare when I talk to somebody that they've gone and really figured out if they're not eligible. The sticker prices are high, like we've been talking about. We have people that make 250,000. One of my colleagues, Matt, was talking about a family over 300,000. They had crossover years with their kid. There were situations where they were eligible for need-based aid. So not everybody's eligible, absolutely, but that's the first reason. If you haven't done your homework and you know what you're doing to make that decision, you could be leaving money on the table. Second reason that's huge is for not a lot, but some schools, if you don't apply for financial aid, submit those forms freshman year, you are telling the college, I'm good. I never am going to need any help from you from the financial aid office. And before COVID, I used to say to my audiences, really? Are you going to roll the dice on that? And then look at what happened with COVID. Of course, I didn't anticipate COVID, but all of a sudden, people that had thriving businesses, their doors were shut and they had no income. Well, a family like that, if they have a sophomore in college and they decided, I never am going to get need-based aid, I'm not submitting the form, that college could just basically say, I'm sorry, you told us you didn't need it, so we're not going to open that door junior, senior year. So that's a big one. Another big one, and this one's counterintuitive, but it does happen. There are some schools like in NYU, very popular school. If you don't submit those forms, they won't consider the student for merit-based aid, which makes no sense because merit, I've explained, has nothing to do with your finances. But if that's their policy and it is what it is, you could be leaving merit money on the table, which obviously we've talked about it, is a huge chunk. Appealing. One of our experts on our team is the head of scholarships at University of Oklahoma. And he says, you know what? If we have parents that are appealing and students that are appealing, we'll look and see if they submitted the FAFSA. Are they taking advantage of the federal direct student loans? If they're not, they think, well, how hard up can this family really be? And it can negatively affect the appeal result. And then last but not least, that the only thing your child and you need to do for your child to be eligible for federal direct student loans, which are really the only student loans out there because it's in your child's social security number exclusively, all they need to do is submit the FAFSA. So if that's something that's part of your strategy or might be, it's not available if you don't submit the FAFSA. In most cases, you're going to want to submit the CSS profile as well. There's very few cases through all my years where I said to a family, all right, maybe you don't submit the CSS profile, but they had to call the school and get very specific answers to certain questions from a reputable source that they could document, because we just really don't want you to be kicking yourself, right? Because down the road, it's like, oh, I should have submitted these forms. So I think that's my soapbox. I think that was
No,
long enough, right?
and
I kind of
I
hit.
appreciate it. And the same is true with work study. You can't your child can't get work study jobs, um, which I believe students should work while they're in college. I think it's good, and work study jobs are great. You have to have the FAFSA. I know that when our daughter was applying to college, and I was not a college counselor yet, and I called to ask if we needed to submit the FAFSA. This is on her freshman application in order for her to be considered for merit aid, and they said no, so we didn't fill out the FAFSA. And she got merit aid, and then when sophomore year came and we got the tuition bill, there wasn't any merit aid there, and my husband was having a heart attack, kind of. He said, "What happened?" And so I called, and they said, "You didn't fill out the FAFSA." I was like, so we always made it a point. The other thing, and you and I talked about this earlier today, Peg, when we were chatting. Again, colleges are businesses, and and there are families who are blessed with the ability to pay full price, or I'm not saying that they're going to pay full price, but and filling out the FAFSA can prove that to colleges, as colleges are looking. What do you say about that? Is that good, bad?
Yeah, but school, I think it, and I was just talking to one of our other experts in Slack today about that. It's if they're need blind, they don't look at it for bringing in their class. At least that's what they say. If they're need aware, then what most of the schools have, when I've chatted with them, what they say is when we're closing out our class, right? And we look at there's Mary Pat and Peg is Pell eligible, and Mary Pat's parents can pay full price. then that might help that Mary Pat get in when they're doing that. But one thing that they can look at when they're taking kids off the wait list, which has been they're using wait lists. I mean, you
Oh,
know about
yes.
this too,
Yep.
and a really in really interesting strategic ways. And I'm being charitable when I say interesting. And they will look at the FAFSA. But I always tell parents, look, if you if you are eligible, if you want to get need-based aid, you say you're applying and you apply. If that's going to hurt anything, then your child doesn't belong at that school. Don't act like you can pay full price and then you're going to get that bill. Your kid's going to get in and they're going to say, okay, where's the moolah? And then all of a sudden you don't have it, right? Or you're leveraging your retirement and you're taking out tons of loans that you're co-signing or they're in your name. So I just really tell parents don't stress about these things. It's
Yeah.
impossible to say exactly is a college going to think about this or that. And they know they're expensive and they know that families need money. That's why they have departments creating these packages.
Great. I think we talked about international students, basically, but
Yeah.
um, okay. So this you mentioned this earlier. So this is the formula of how colleges determine eligibility for need-based aid. And Peg and I was telling her, I know we tend to talk in you know, code. So that's why I put the different uh, full names out there. But why don't you walk families through this again?
Yeah, yeah. So this is a really simple equation. They take that full cost of attendance, so tuition fees, room and board, books, travel, personal expenses, all of that together. And then they say, you submitted forms. The FAFSA has your child you'll see when you log into their studentaid.gov account after you submitted what your federal SAI is. So they subtract that and that's your need. That doesn't mean that, oh, if it's $40,000, that's all you're going to pay. And most schools, it's not. They changed it from expected family contribution, that term, because people heard it and said, oh, that's what I should expect to contribute. And many times it's more than that at a lot of schools. Student aid index doesn't really mean anything to anybody either, but it doesn't say this is your contribution. So that's how they do it. The CSS profile, now that I've talked about that, there's that second SAI/EFC that we call the institutional methodology version of that gets calculated. And for some families, that could be quite a bit more if you're divorced and you have two parents that make a lot of money because of the things that I explained earlier. But for some families, like for myself, it could have been lower potentially because they were going to take into account that I have twins and the federal schools were not. And so this is what they use. So that's why it's so vital for you to be an informed consumer, that you have decent estimates of your student aid index, institutional version and the federal version. You understand what it is, and then you understand estimates, realizing there could be variability. There will be variability with the CSS profile schools. It won't be spot on. The federal schools, though, when you see that on the FAFSA, that's what it is. They don't vary from school to school. All those schools, which is the lion's share of them in this country, that's your SAI. So it's much more transparent for the FAFSA schools.
Okay. So here are some suggestions for reducing the cost of college. One is doing Running Start through high school, which is basically here in Lake Washington, students typically will take classes either at Bellevue College or at Lake Washington Institute of Technology. They can earn up to 2 years of college, transfer them over. It's paid for. I think students just have to pay for the cost of books, but that's a huge cost savings. Or after high school graduation, going to a community or technical college. That can be great, especially a lot of students have no idea what they want to do, or they can get their prerequisite courses taken care of and then transfer to a four-year college. You can go to a four-year college like UW-Bothell, Seattle U, Seattle Pacific, UW Seattle. Live at home, you'll save some money. And then if a student is going to live at college, they can become a resident advisor and get their cost of housing taken care of. Any other ideas that you have? Egg?
Just what I've been talking about. Those are great suggestions for cutting the costs, but just understanding where your family can find affordable schools and get the biggest discounts. Because as I've been saying, these discounts are sizable. They're 5 figures a year when it comes to merit, and they're really nice discounts. So, I mean, there's very few people that can afford these high sticker prices, and then there's people that can and just don't want to pay that, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just being aware, yeah, being aware of that stuff is just super important. It's literally tens of thousands of dollars of savings.
But again, working with families here in the area, and I'm sure you hear this too, but and that's where you need to look beyond the top, 25 schools in the United States, because you're not likely to find any, the merit aid or things like that at those schools. So,
You have to understand the business plan of the school and how they discount because they all do it. It's just a matter of how.
okay, so what's the timeline families need to take into account for need or merit-based aid?
Yeah, so we mentioned this, but it bears repeating. So for merit, most of the merit aid, your child will automatically be considered if you get usually it's around December 1. But sooner the better to get the application in because then you're automatically considered. There are some bigger ones where there could be an extra application. Typically, you're filling all that stuff out before you know if your child's admitted. It is what it is. My son did it, did the Emory application and didn't get in. So, obviously he's not going to get the merit scholarship. But most of it is automatic for need. As we've said, if you get that in by the end of this month, you should be good as far as deadlines. If your child's applying regular admission, you're way ahead. But then you don't have to worry about the merit and you're just good to go. But you can Google priority financial aid deadline, Willamette or whatever the school is, and that should get you a link in the search results where you can find out what their deadlines are and mark them down and keep track. And then just shoot to send in these forms like not right before a deadline because there could be a windstorm and you lose your internet. You never know. Sometimes the forms, the CSS and the FAFSA can not be functioning. They could go down, they can have errors. So you don't want to create more stress and wait till the last minute because sometimes stars don't align and you can't get it in.
And then typically, is it February, March that colleges will send out financial aid letters?
Yeah, if you apply early decision, you'll get admitted and you should get a package sometimes like right around Christmas, right?
Okay.
Right around
And then
that timeline.
and that includes early action.
No, early action's usually later. So your
Okay.
early action's usually January to mid-February.
Okay.
You get the package and then regular decision, it could be it could be as
April.
late as April. Yeah,
Okay.
that's why I personally love early action because you're not committed to one school, so you still have leverage and appealing and everything. But you find out sooner if you have a winter break, you can go check out some of the schools you got into. It just gives you more time to compare offers and it's not binding.
Right. I agree. You mentioned appealing a couple times. What are families' options with that?
Yeah, so what this is your child gets in, they get a bunch of packages from the colleges, and many times you don't have to accept that offer. Even if you got money, you don't have to accept it. You can appeal merit aid. So that's the non-need based aid. So for example, if competing schools like out in New England, like Boston and BU and Northeastern, you get a merit from one school but not the other, you can appeal and say, hey, or you got 10,000 versus 20,000. Hey, thank you so much for that $10,000 scholarship. I really want to come here. Northeastern gave me 20. Can you match it? Or can you split the difference and give me 15? That kind of thing. That's appealing on the merit side. You can also appeal for need-based aid, and that's super common when people have a change in circumstance, which life happens, right? With COVID, tons of people were doing it. they're going to be looking at 2024. By the time your child is getting packages, you're into next year, 2026. A lot can happen. People get divorced and separated. People lose their job. People are working part-time, whatever it happens to be. That's appealing for need-based aid. So there's two different types of appeal. So for a lot of families, appealing, it's just another step in the process to try and lower the cost. And there's, knock on wood, I've never had a college, I don't think legally they could do this, that they're going to say, how dare you appeal? You know, we're rescinding your admission. That just doesn't happen. They have departments to handle this. They know it's coming. And the worst that can happen is they say no. But it's definitely a step in the process.
Excellent. How about student loans? How do they work?
Yeah, so there's different categories of student loans. There's federal, there's state, and there's private. And there are a few good ones that come out of foundations and stuff. Um, the federal loans, and I mentioned this earlier, there's the federal direct student loan, and that your child will automatically be awarded as long as you submit the FAFSA with your child. There are two versions of that. There's a subsidized version and an unsubsidized version. So if you have need, remember that equation, cost of attendance minus SAI equals need. If you have need there, the college can award you what's called subsidized student loans. That means there's no interest on that loan until 6 months after graduation. So that's a no-brainer, right? You know you have a loan. You know your child's going to have to repay it, but it's basically an interest-free loan. You can pay it off after graduation, and you're paying the principal. Then the unsubsidized version is the same loan, but interest accrues when it's dispersed. That's usually the best place that most families will start. And it's wonderful because it truly is a student loan. Only the student is on the hook for that. Your child builds a credit history. Hopefully, if they pay it off on time, it's good for their credit, right? The other federal loan is called a PLUS loan. It used to be called a Parent PLUS loan, which I still use that term because it is the opposite. It is not a student loan. It is your loan. One parent applies. It's pretty easy to get. So people that don't have the best credit scores will use this as a way to fund college. I'm not a giant fan of these because they will give them out to families that, in my opinion, not even close can they afford to pay off the loan. But this big, beautiful act, actually something I really like that got passed in there are caps on this loan. So it used to be unlimited. You could get for the full cost of attendance minus any other money the college was giving. So if it was 80,000 and they gave 10,000, the parent could literally get a $70,000 Parent PLUS loan. Times 4 years, you can see how that can be crazy. Now they have caps. So it's 20,000 a year and capping at 65,000 for a given student. So now it's ring fenced, right? That's still money, 65,000, but you can no longer take out loans for 50, 60,000 a year. So that's the federal bucket. The state of Washington has loans. And there are some states that will actually give loans to any student. Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Iowa, Kentucky. So you don't have to go to school there and you don't have to live there. So that's another bucket to look at. And then private loans. That's the private loan market, the Sallie Mae's, the College Aves, the SoFi's of the world. So when you get to that point in the process, you're really shopping again. Like you're shopping for college, you're shopping for loans, and you figure out what makes the most sense. So that's high level. Those are the loans that are out there and the types of loans.
So with the true student loans through the government, is there a cap on those as to how much a
Oh
student
yeah,
can?
yeah. Thanks for that. I forgot to mention for the student, the federal direct student loan, the cap, there's a annual cap that it totals 27,000 unless for some circumstances, if kids are independent, it's a little more. But for most kids who are dependent students, it's 27,000 over all 4 years, and you
Okay.
get a certain amount each year. So in my mind, that's a reasonable amount of debt. That's a reasonable investment for a good 4 year education. And most kids, my daughter graduated with a bachelor's in social work, not a high paying career. She went and got her master's. But if she had that 27,000, even at a low paying starting salary, she could have afforded to make those payments. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out. That's a
Okay.
$27,000 cap. And that's always
Over
been the case. That didn't
over
change
for the entire undergraduate, right?
for
Yeah.
all 4 years.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Um, what advice do you have for parents of seniors? You know, their kids are going to be starting college in a year. And then if you have advice for anybody younger, any younger parents too, we'll
Oh,
take.
yes, I have tons of advice. Yes, for seniors, it's game time, right? So you gotta, if you don't have what's called a federal student aid ID, just Google that. It's not hard to
It'll
get.
be in the
It's
resources.
yeah, and
It-
it gets approved immediately. You don't have to wait 3 to 5 days like you used to have to, and because that's how you're going to get into both your child's FAFSA with them, and then you're going to be what's called a contributor on their FAFSA, and you're going to have to log in and do your part. So get that FSA ID and get that FAFSA done. Go to FAFSA.gov, log in, start as the do your child's FAFSA with them. They will invite you, hit submit, and then go to the link and fill out your part. As Mary Pat said earlier, I mean, some people struggle with the FAFSA, but they have made it easier and easier. Some people just like to get help. That's fine, but they have made it easier and shorter, and data moves directly from the IRS. That you gotta get that done, and then do some homework and understand what your student aid index is for get an estimate for the CSS profile schools as well as the FAFSA, because without that, you don't really know if you're getting a good offer if you don't understand how the colleges do it when you go to appeal. And that's advice for juniors and sophomores. The tax year, like we said, for seniors is 2024. So if you're a junior parent listening to this, you are in Q4 of your base year. So be careful. Don't create capital gains. You know, if you get a raise, of course, that's lovely. But I see people every year that inflate their income and then they have to deal with that. So just understand that. The other thing that I'll share is friends and family are lovely. I love my friends and my family, but don't listen to them when they give you advice. You really have to understand your situation, your child. Usually, when people give advice, they're not sharing their adjusted gross income and their portfolio when they tell their neighbor not to submit the FAFSA. And they don't know what schools and do they want it for merit aid. So it's not a good place to listen to advice from people unless you're literally going to sit down at a table and compare apples to apples, which I'm being facetious. Nobody does that, right? So it's tempting to take advice from friends and family, but in this space, not a good idea. Um, and my last piece of advice for all of you as you navigate this is really focus on where your child's going to thrive. Try to forget about, my daughter used to say, "Well, I've never heard of this school. It must not be any good." And I said, "That makes no sense. That just meant we are lucky in this country that there's over 3,000 colleges and there are great schools where your child's going to thrive. Just because they're Harvard, that doesn't mean that's the best place for your child, even if your child can get in." And I just firmly believe that. And when I went through this with my two, they went to Indiana University and James Madison University. And I would guess some of you haven't even heard of JMU. And it was phenomenal for my daughter because that's where she belonged. And now she works at Harborview as a trauma therapist. She didn't need to go to Harvard to do that. So, as a parent, I'm saying that, and as a professional, just really keep that Thrive index is that's really what you want to think about. And that's, your child, and they're going to know when they visit schools where they really feel like they belong.
I couldn't agree more with what you said there, Peg. You talked about a couple of them, but there are common myths about paying for college or just in college in general. And I'll start with one, um, which is unfortunate, but you know, we live in an area where we have such high achieving students. I'm amazed at all that some of the high school students do. And the reality is if you're thinking that your 4.0 unweighted GPA student with lots of rigor classes and a strong standardized test score is going to get a full ride, there aren't that many. It's a very small percentage. The same is true if you've got a student who's a gifted athlete. a very small percentage of high school athletes will play in college, and very few of them actually receive a lot of money. Although I guess college sports has changed with the NIL. That's a different conversation. Anyways,
Yeah, that
but,
is.
but just anyway, I know you've got a couple myths too that besides the ones that you've mentioned about not talking to your neighbors and family about this stuff.
Yeah, another big one is people will say, "Oh, we're just going to screw ourselves if we save for college. So we're just not going to save because that hurts us." Is it part of the calculation? Absolutely. The most it's going to hurt you is a little shy of 6%. And you most likely are going to have an amount of money that the colleges are going to expect you to fork over. And it's most likely going to be five figures, right? If you're looking at out of state schools, like Mary Pat was talking about, the beginning, private schools. So the fact is, you're going to need some money that you have earmarked for college. So, I mean, I'm a financial planner, as I've said a couple times, like saying, "Oh, I'm just not going to save because that means the colleges are going to give it all to me." That's just not the case, especially if you make a nice living. That income is going to drive up your student aid index way more than your assets ever will. So if you are fortunate enough to save, you should save. That's a big one. The other one, and I mentioned this before a little bit when I was talking about thriving, do not build a college list based on rankings, and especially US News and World Report. Everybody knows about that one. If you are going to look at rankings, and not all of them are terrible, you really have to look at what they're looking at and why that school got that ranking. 40% of US News and World Report's ranking is provosts talking about each
Mhm.
other. Who cares? As a
Right.
parent, I've been there. I don't really care what Dartmouth's provost is saying about Stanford. I really don't, right? That's not what you care about for your child to go to college, right? Some of them will look at things, but people come to me all the time, and I can tell it's just right off of the
Mhm.
rankings, and there's no thought about the things that really matter to the student.
Mhm.
Is this really a good fit for them?
Right.
Because they can go to a highfalutin school, and if they're miserable and you're getting the phone calls, they're going to be gone if they're not fitting in and they're not happy.
Absolutely. All right. As I said, we will be sending, this has been recorded. The recording will be sent out to everybody who registered. With the recording, we'll have a list of resources that we've been talking about. Peg, do you want to talk about what the Scantron, am I even saying that right?
Yeah, basically, if you want
QR
that,
code, sorry, QR
yeah,
code,
yeah, the QR code, yeah,
not
Scantron, you're
Scantron.
dating yourself.
I'm very dated.
Um, yeah, if you want to set up a free, our software, we call it MyCap. Like I said, if you put your phone up there, you put in your email, you answer a few questions. You don't even have to answer a lot of financial questions. You'll get in there. Then you can go in and update it. We will tell you your federal SAI will give you an estimate. We'll give you an estimate of your institutional SAI. You can plug in three colleges. We'll project, hey, are you going to get merit aid? Are you going to get need-based aid? Those three schools, if they have merit aid and you click in there, we're going to show you all the merit aid they offer. We might project it, we might not, but even if we don't, you're going to see it. So that just gets the ball rolling for you to get an idea of kind of where you fit, because that's the thing. It's how does the college, what's their business plan, like we've talked about tonight, and then where do you fit and where does your child fit? That's, if you can get your arms around that, you're going to be so far ahead of the game, and it's just a much less stressful process with your child. Because really, I always think about it, you're going to be waving goodbye at that dorm before you know it, right? I
Oh my
remember
gosh,
those
yes.
two and my two, like I get choked up even thinking about it, right? Waving goodbye to them and dropping them when they're freshmen, and you want to enjoy it. They're teenagers, so they're always going to be irritating here and there, but if you can navigate this with less stress, then just makes your last year or two with them, as you're navigating this with them, just more enjoyable.
Exactly. Um, so that QR code will be in the resources also, along with a link to College Aid Pro. They have a lot of free resources on their website. Um, So if there's any questions, we
I
will.
see a couple. Yeah,
Okay.
I see a couple in here. So one is, what's the impact of impact of filing extension for tax filing when your student's a junior or senior? There's nothing wrong with filing an extension. The point I was trying to make is when you go to do the FAFSA, you are going to consent for your data to be moved directly from the IRS, your tax data, into your portion of the FAFSA, which will then be a part of your child's FAFSA. So if you filed an extension and you just submitted your taxes October 15th, there's a lag time where that um, transfer of your information will not happen if it's newly filed. That's why I said when your kids are in college, it's better to just file your taxes in a timely way. Also, if you're going to appeal, a lot of times if you're going to say, hey, 2024 wasn't representative, I got amazing bonus or I got paid something out or whatever, the colleges very typically will say, well, thanks for sharing. Can we see your 25 tax return? Because that's official proof that you're telling the truth, honestly, and that you actually make $80,000 less typically. But if you don't file your taxes till September 1st, there's no you can't as effectively appeal. So that's what I was saying. It's not wrong to file an extension, but when your kids are in college, it's beneficial to get the FAFSA in to have it done, and as well as if you're appealing to have it done. And then there's another question.
Is
Um,
is it worth to hire a professional to file the FAFSA? We heard that it's super easy to make mistakes if we do it ourselves. What happens if we file wrong?
so if you do file wrong, you can make a correction. And then it gets resent. You can make a correction to some things, not everything, and then it gets resent out because you can send it to up to 20 colleges. Should you hire a professional or not? I mean, it's kind of up to you. I work with people where I tell them go in, do it. And if you want a set of eyes, we jump on an hour meeting. I look through it. They ask me their questions and then they're ready to hit submit. Some people, that's just really peace of mind for them. They're not number. I had a mom who every year she could have done it. I mean, every year she had done it, right? But it was like this is her gift to herself that I look it over and it's not all on her shoulders. But if it's something you go through and you feel good about, then
And
go ahead and hit submit. The CSS profile is more of a bear for sure.
yeah, that's the CSS profile is a lot more of an exam type thing.
Yeah, it
Uh,
literally is like an
whereas,
exam, and there's strategies around
yeah,
it, and yeah.
and I, in my experience with the FAFSA, I think the government does a good job of instructions, and there's YouTube videos, and again, I agree with you that it depends on a person's comfort level, and it could be worth having somebody do it for them. But I would recommend that you check out the resources available, and because I
Yeah,
think
if you're in our community, I do how to's and they're right in that software. And I walk you through how to do it. So you would see it in there. But yeah, it's kind of your comfort level and you can correct a mistake. People just get freaked out when they make a mistake. But read the FAFSA. Mary Pat is correct. They have information there, but people just they see the big words and then they write a number in and they move on. Like read the fine print when they say don't include this, include that. Because people do make very common mistakes, even though it says on there not to include something, they might just overlook it, right? And they include it anyways.
all right. Well, I think that that's all of our questions. Here's, as I always say, I'm a resource in the community. Feel free to reach out to me, although I'm not a college financial planning expert. So if you ask me anything about it, I'll probably say, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Find Your Fit is doing another webinar on Tuesday, November 5th about standardized testing. So if you are parent of a freshman, sophomore, or junior, you might find that a worthwhile session. But Peg, thank you as always for sharing
Oh, you're
all of your
welcome.
expertise. I always enjoy our conversations here and all that you know. So
Sure,
Wish everybody a good
absolutely.
night, and let's hopefully maybe the Mariners won. I have no idea.
Yeah, hopefully the Mariners and the Hawks won.
That's
We'll
right.
see.
Okay. Have a good night, everybody.
All
Bye.
right, take care.
Bye, Peg.
Bye bye.
Good to see you.